Thank you. So those of you who heard my conversion story earlier heard me mention that there was a little part I left out in that version, a little bump in the road that I faced that is worthy of its own talk, especially for a conference with the title, Risk Jesus. So let's go back to when I was in RCIA. And I was, you know us people who have just recently discovered the beauty of the Catholic faith. I mean, we are on fire. Because again, it's like, you've discovered the owner's manual to the human soul. You're like, it's all true, and there's so much wisdom, and my life is so much better. The more I follow these teachings, it's like, who would have guessed that this actually worked? Is this the same Catholicism that I hear about in pop culture? I mean, you're excited, you're on fire. And particularly for me, that I go into much more detail about this in the book, but the issue that converted my husband and I was the issue of respect for life, the issue of abortion and also artificial contraception. We came to believe that the church was exactly right when it says that human life begins in the womb and is worthy of dignity, and when it said that artificial contraception is not good for the individual or good for society. Thanks for the applause, but a couple people in here just thought, that's nuts. I would have. If I'd heard this talk 10 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, now that one, I might give you that there are a couple wise things about Catholicism, but that one's just a bridge too far. And don't worry, nobody came here for the natural family planning talk. I'm not going to go into all that. I do go into detail in my book, but just to say briefly, what I found so exciting about it and what I wanted to shout from the rooftops about was that what I came to see, because I'd always considered myself pro-choice, and I didn't even know you could be pro-contraception, because who's against contraception? I mean, isn't it like air and water, like just this necessity that every human has to have access to have a good life? And so when I realized that the church was right, I realized that my pro-choice stance had been directly connected to my acceptance, that I just took it for granted that the pro-contraception worldview was true. And to sum up a very long story that takes up about 4 chapters of my book in just a couple of sentences, what I came to see is that a society can only respect human life to the extent that it respects the act that creates human life. When you sever one from the other, either physically or even just mentally, it will result in disaster for individuals and especially for societies at large. And so I had that blog that I was talking about, and I went to my blog and I was like, guys, read about the theology of the body and what the church teaches about human sexuality. You guys need to get on board with this. It is going to change your lives. And God and the saints and the angels were up there in heaven being like, watch what's going to happen next. So while I'm talking about oh, guys, this is great, oh, it's amazing, I started having a weird pain in my leg here. Turns out it was a deep vein thrombosis, a life-threatening blood clot in a major vein. They can sometimes be fatal. And I was diagnosed with this during pregnancy, and it turns out that I have a very serious blood clotting disorder called factor II. It's genetic, it's rare, and I inherited it from both parents. So I don't know if there's something they need to tell me about how they met. Was it at a family reunion? It's so rare to have both copies of this gene that scientists can't even study it because nobody has 2 copies of factor II. And so all they knew is that obviously being pregnant had caused me to have this deep vein thrombosis. I was kind of lucky I didn't die. And so, of course, I have the doctors immediately breathing down my neck saying, you have to use 5 different forms of contraception. They said, you can't have any more kids, and on top of that, they said I had to take a medicine after the baby was born that is an FDA Category X drug. 90% chance of severe, severe birth defects if you conceive while you're on this drug. So basically, the woman who was blathering on about the beauty of the church's teaching against contraception just became the poster child for contraception. And on top of that, the medicine that I needed to take while I was pregnant is one of the most expensive medicines you can ever have the misfortune of being on. I was horrified when I find out that the way you take it is through a shot in the stomach, not what you want to do when you're 8 months pregnant, but that turned out to be the best part of it. My insurance did cover it, thank goodness, so my portion was only $986 a month. So that was my big bargain, $986 a month that I have to take for this medicine. I am in RCIA, and keep in mind, we talked about earlier, I had defined myself as an atheist all my life. It was an inextricable part of my identity. It was the jersey I wore. It was my source of pride. It was my calling card that I thought that made me seem smart to people. And so suddenly, I was in these doctor's offices. Not only was I suddenly not an atheist, not only was I suddenly the Christian, I was the crazy religious extremist who has insane views that puts her health at stake in their views. Like, I had this moment where I went into my doctor's office and I thought, I'm just gonna tell him, this is gonna be my witness, just like the martyrs, and I'm gonna tell him that I follow Jesus Christ, and I believe that the rules of his church are given by God himself, and they're the owner's manual to the human soul, and he can't force me to use contraception. And being that I come from this, reserved, uptight, atheist family where we're not emotional about anything ever, like the way once a year I hug my parents, kind of like, the one arm hug, so not a touchy-feely family. So my big witness to my doctor was, I said, I think I'm reading about Catholicism, so I'm not gonna go ahead and use contraception. And I thought, I hope all the Jesus talk didn't make him uncomfortable. So I was a good fit for Catholicism all along, I guess. So this forced me to do a crazy thing that I didn't think I was going to have to do. I had to pray suddenly because, I thought that the way you be Catholic is you read interesting things about God, right? You don't have to, pray, right? And so suddenly I had no choice but to turn to prayer because I was in this situation. I can't afford this medicine. I don't know where to turn. I don't know what to do. These doctors are telling me that I can't have any more kids, but does this natural family planning thing really work? I had so many questions. And so I went to the Lord in church. I sat in front of the Blessed Sacrament and just, I'm yapping, blah, blah, blah. How is this going to work out? And the question that I felt God posed to me, I didn't hear a voice or anything. My prayer life isn't that interesting. I wish. I didn't hear a voice. The question was put on my heart. You know how that goes. I heard the Lord say to me, what kind of happiness do you want? What kind of happiness do you want? Because all my life, I had been seeking happiness. In fact, that's why I called my book Something Other Than God. It comes from the C.S. Lewis quote where he says, all that we call human history is the long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy. And as I wrote my story, I realized that was the story of my life. My conversion was not so much about finding God per se as it was finally finding happiness. And so that is the question that God posed to me that I didn't even fully understand in the moment. What kind of happiness do you want? And until that moment, I had not realized just how much I associated happiness with autonomy, with control. That's something you might not have thought about before. I hadn't until I was in that situation. But when you think about it, in our culture, we have so much control over our lives. And sometimes I wonder, well, I bet if you did a graph of how much control people have over their lives in human history, I bet that the rise of atheism stays directly on track with the rise of control. Because I have some friends who grew up in Mexico in just utter poverty. They had no electricity. They didn't even have a roof. They didn't have beds. They didn't have blankets. They had no control. And it was a terrible life, but my friend, who was deeply religious, her mother was deeply religious, she said, the one nice thing about being that poor is there's never any temptation to think that you are God. And that's the thing with our lives today. I mean, who needs a God when you're a God? When you can control anything you want? One of the things I think about sometimes is just how much the advent of electricity changed our lives. To give you just one example, we don't think about this, but my grandfather, God bless him, he is 100 years old. He's the one I dedicated the book to. He was born in 1914, and my book was published in 2014, which was so meaningful. I talked to him a lot about what his life was like back on the farm before electricity. And one of the things that hadn't occurred to me is if you lived before artificial light, before electricity, when the sun set, your day was done. It didn't matter how much, if you had stuff left to do, if there was more you wanted to do, you were done. You had no control. And it's a really powerful thing simply to be able to control lights. To say well, I had more emails I wanted to send. I had a lot more that I want to do. My day's not done when the sun goes down. Click, 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 click. You turn on all the lights. That is just one example of about 10,000 of the way we have this supreme control over our lives that nobody in human history has ever had before. And we begin to rely on that. We begin to associate this control with happiness. And I think that's one of the reasons why people sometimes react so angrily, so vitriolically when they hear about the quote-unquote rules of the Catholic Church. That's one of the reasons they used to make me angry, because when someone was saying, well, the church says, you can't do this, you can't do this, because I didn't understand the church was saying a yes to something positive, a yes of something else. All I heard was I might have to give up a little bit of control. And my reaction was to say, I'm out of there. Because in my mind, control equals happiness. And if you take away my control, you are taking away my happiness. And I saw it in the big things, obviously when I was sitting there in front of the Blessed Sacrament, when the Lord was asking me that question, what kind of happiness do you want? Do you want the kind of happiness where it's all about meeting your immediate needs through control? And I think you see it even more in the little things. Like after that moment in front of the Blessed Sacrament, I suddenly began to see, maybe, let's say someone from church called and said, I'm really having a hard time. Could I talk with you about something? Could I have a moment of your time? And I would feel the Lord prompting me like, yes, you're supposed to do this. And I would withdraw. I would say, no, but I had a plan. My babysitter is coming that day, and I want to do some research and reading, and by that I mean surf the web, and I have important things that I need to do. I have a plan, and that's the kind of happiness I wanted. The short-term, quick payoff, I get my immediate needs met my way, don't have to rely on God any real way. And I realized after being asked that question, that is the type of happiness that I was going for. And you know what? It is the type of happiness that I had been going for my whole life. My whole life I had been basing my happiness on control. And I realized even though I was in RCIA, even though I was about to become Catholic, I thought I still got to do that. I thought I still got to have my, short-term, instant payoff, fleeting, control-based happiness where Jen sits around and controls everything, decides what would make Jen happy, and then she goes and does it. I thought I got to just do that and also go to Mass on Sunday, and that's what it means to be Catholic. That's what it means to follow Jesus. And when I found myself with this diagnosis, suddenly I realized that there's this whole other path to happiness, that this owner's manual that the church gives us by that tells us how to order our lives so that Christ and his church and his sacraments are at the very center. That is the real path to happiness, following this owner's manual. But here's the catch. It only works if God actually exists. You know, to do what I was having to do, like take this medicine that I was going to have to be on indefinitely, but $900 a month, and then not take, the 10 different forms of contraception that were being pushed on me, and continue down this path when we easily at that time had like 15 years of fertility left, that will lead to misery if there is not actually a God out there who is real and is going to have your back. See, I thought that I got to be a functional atheist. I knew that I believed about this God that I had read in the pages of books, but I didn't think that, I remember actually saying to Joe at one point when we were sitting in the car, I write about this in the book, we were sitting in the car outside of a restaurant on my 30th birthday, and I said, Joe at this point was way ahead in his own conversion. My husband was, he was just bought in and on fire. And I said, what are we going to do? I have this clotting disorder, and if we did have future pregnancies, they might be able to be managed by this medicine, but it costs $1,000 a month. There's no way this can work. What are we going to do? And my husband said, do you believe that God would give us these rules, this owner's manual, if it would lead to misery? Don't you think that God is going to do something to bring joy and peace into your life if you follow this owner's manual he has given you? Don't you believe that God is real? And I remember saying to him, well, yeah, I believe that God is real. I just didn't know we were going to act like he was real. This is like crazy talk now. So I prayed to God. God kept putting that question on my heart. What kind of happiness do you want? Do you want to control your way into having a bunch of fleeting experiences that don't last and leave you hungry for more and ultimately leave you empty, just like when you were an atheist? Or do you want to follow me, follow my owner's manual, walk this path that is paved with self-sacrifice to the kind of lasting happiness that will last forever and that is eternal? What kind of happiness do you want? And so I told God, I said, okay, I think I want the good kind. That's the right answer, right? Like the eternal happiness. I'm in RCIA. That's what I'm supposed to say, right? But I said, look, you've got to help a sister out here. Like I'm a lifelong atheist. I need something, Lord. I need something to know that I am not going to throw my life and my family's lives and my entire family's happiness away on this crazy experiment of actually being a Catholic who follows all the rules. And so I was really in this dark place. We were having awful financial problems because of the cost of this medicine. And so I went to the pharmacy. I could not afford my latest dose of medicine. And so I went to the pharmacy to beg for some samples. Sometimes they give people samples. And I thought, if I can get like 5 days worth of samples, then I can ask some relatives. I can come up with the money to pay for these shots, which were truly life-saving at that point. And so I went up to the front and I gave the woman my insurance card, and she said, that'll be a $30 copay. And I said, oh, sorry, I don't want to get a bill later. Look, let me just tell you, it's not $30. I was here the other day. It's the 960 something. And she checked and double-checked and said, no, it's absolutely right, $30 copay. So I got my month's worth of medicine. And I thought, maybe, is that my sign? Is that God telling me that I can do this, that he will be with me? So in the intervening month, my husband was called on this radical path away from, I mentioned he had all the Ivy League degrees. He was the executive. He was going to do these big worldly things. And this is in the second part of the book. I really go into his conversion story here. He was called to leave all of that, to leave all of his Ivy League statusy ladder climbing track behind, open a humble small business and work for somebody else, leave all of his entrepreneurship dreams behind. And it meant that we would have insurance. and the insurance covered my medicine even though I had the pre-existing condition and was already pregnant. So we had the new insurance now because of my husband's conversion that was just about to kick in. And I go to the pharmacy, and this one was the new insurance would be a $50 copay. Still very affordable. But I thought, just before the new insurance kicks in, I'm going to get one last round of medicine with the old $30 copay that I'd just gotten. So that'll, save me a few bucks. So I go to the pharmacy counter, and I said, with the insurance card I had previously used, $30 copay, I went to get the medicine. And they rang it up, and they said, that'll be $960-something. And I said, no, that's not right. That's just, I know that it's a $30 copay. I just got it. And they said, no, you must have been in a different pharmacy. And I said, no, this is the only pharmacy I used. It was here. I said, check your records. It's a $30 copay. And the guy looked and looked and looked, and he said, ma'am, we have no record of that transaction. Now, I don't take that to mean that God always pays for your expensive things. I wish. That is not actually how it's worked out. What it did teach me, though, that was my sign from God saying, you follow this owner's manual, you follow me, you seek the real kind of happiness that is eternal and that lasts. I will be with you, and you will find that which you seek. Thank you.